Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a slightly abbreviated show today following a few shows that have gone a little longer than I would like. I am out of town this weekend, so this is being pre-recorded on Friday. I have a few stories that I do want to touch on, many other stories I would like to touch on, but I'm a little bit crunched for time. And I'm hoping to maybe do some videos next week to fill in some of that gap. But we'll get to a few of these stories. I also have a fantastic interview to bring you guys today, so we do still have some great content for you. Want to start with the RP plugs. Please go to realprogressives.org if you want to learn more about us or help out our organization. You can find our Patreon there. All sorts of great content, podcasts, articles, all that stuff. You guys know the drill. Make sure that you're checking out all of the content we put out if you have yet to do so. Obviously, right now, a very big story is the Texas abortion ban, and how the Supreme Court has handled this, and some of the politics that led to the Supreme Court being in the condition that they currently are politically. This is in Slate. What we know and what we don't about how Texas's abortion ban will be enforced. If you donate to a Texas abortion fund from out of state, could you still be sued for $10,000? On September 1st, a new law banning abortion after 6 weeks took effect in Texas. The measure, known as SB 8, will not be enforced by government officials. Instead, it allows anybody to sue any individual who performs, aids, or abets such an abortion for a minimum of $10,000 plus attorney's fees. Republican lawmakers devised the convoluted structure to insulate the law from judicial review, and so far, the gambit has worked. At midnight on Wednesday, the Supreme Court refused to block SB 8 by a 5-4 vote, citing complex and novel procedural questions. The decision effectively overturned Roe v. Wade by allowing Texas to ban abortions before viability, a direct affront to nearly 50 years of precedent. SB 8 has prompted widespread outrage already, but there's also been a great deal of confusion about how exactly it is meant to function. As Chief Justice John Roberts noted in dissent, its scheme is not only unusual but unprecedented. No state has ever before tried to get around the Constitution by deputizing private parties to carry out unconstitutional restrictions on the state's behalf. In Justice Sonia Sotomayor's words, no one knows exactly how SB 8 will work in practice yet. Below is a list of questions and answers about SB 8, roughly ordered from straightforward to ambiguous to unknowable. I want to drive home, you guys, that because the Democratic Party currently has both houses of Congress and the White House, they could simply pass a law that makes this illegal. Wouldn't be that difficult. And then the Supreme Court would have to find a different way. So I've seen a lot of people online blaming the likes of Bernie or Susan Sarandon, or pick your villain on the left that the liberals like to hand-wring about, and trying to blame them for this result. And I think that's utterly ridiculous, considering the fact that the Democrats could actually do something about this right now, and they're not doing it. Maybe they will, but they're not doing it yet. So it's amazing to me that when the party you support is in power, you still try to deflect and blame others when they refuse to do the things you expect of them. It's amazing the way the liberals can contort themselves to take these kinds of views. I also want to note, you guys, Tim Kaine, who was Hillary's running mate, very establishment type Democrat senator, he supported the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment basically says no federal funds can go to an abortion. So it's not as though the mainstream Democratic Party, who all of these hand-wringers support, is somehow on the side that they think they are. It's insane to me. These liberals think that the Democrats are towing a line that they are not towing. The other example I would give, Joe Biden himself was one of the, he was the chair of the committee that berated and questioned and smeared Anita Hill when she came forward with sexual assault allegations against Clarence Thomas, who obviously was one of the justices to find in support of SB 8. So Joe Biden himself, in service of putting this conservative maniac on the court, Joe Biden squashed sexual assault allegations and berated the woman who was bringing them forward. And yet, who do these liberals blame? They blame fucking Susan Sarandon. I mean, it's, you really cannot make this shit up. This is a really terrible story. I am pro-choice through and through. Nobody, by the way, you guys, likes abortions. Nobody's like pro-abortion. Nobody finds it morally satisfying to get an abortion or to support an abortion. We're pro-choice because we think women should have autonomy over their reproductive decisions. And I would also add, this goes further than just a civil issue or like a matter of bodily autonomy and personal decision making. It goes further than that. There is one thing you must do if you would like to pull a community out of poverty, if you'd like to actually fight poverty in a serious way. There's one step you must take. There are a lot of steps you can take that are fantastic. Implement a good healthcare system, good education, housing, jobs programs, etc. But there's one thing you must do if you want to pull a society out of poverty, and that is empower women. It is to give women autonomy over their own reproductive decisions. That is the first thing any serious person who wants to combat poverty will do. So this issue runs a lot deeper than just the personal rights of it, which are in and of themselves enough, right? No woman should be told what decisions she must make or not make when it comes to these issues, okay? So I wanted to set that aside, this idea that progressives and leftists are pro-abortion. No, nobody wants to see an abortion happen. Nobody wants to have to get an abortion. Nobody wants a loved one or a friend to have to get an abortion. We support the right to choose for a whole myriad of reasons. And this is, in my view, a pretty outrageous finding from the Supreme Court that these Texas lawmakers have gone so far out of their way to skirt previous judicial precedent and come up with this sort of creative way to ban a lot of abortions. I'm hopeful that this will somehow change. I think there are a number of avenues that could be. I mentioned Congress. It could write a law basically that bans this kind of bill. So we'll see what happens going forward, but it's very worth noting. The other thing I would point out politically, the Democrats rolled the fuck over when Merrick Garland was stopped from his ascent to the Supreme Court by the Republicans' obstruction. And then the Democrats rolled over when the Republicans forced their own justice down our throat. So it's not as though the Democrats have actually fought on this issue that they are all too happy to politicize and utilize during election season, right? Remember when it came down to Bernie and Biden in the primary, and the argument was, well, Bernie can't beat Trump, which flawed argument to start with. But even if you actually accept that just for the sake of argument, what they were trying to say is, he's going to get all these Supreme Court choices. And then what do? They roll over for 9 months under Obama, right? And then they roll over as Republicans shove their justices down our throats. And then they turn around and blame Bernie and Susan Sarandon when a finding like this comes down. It's outrageous. It's insane. It's utterly ridiculous. So I'm hopeful this law will be somehow altered or undone, or this finding rather, this Supreme Court ruling. But it's a result of a very undemocratic institution and very undemocratic processes of putting the authorities in place in this institution. This also applies to the federal judiciary, you guys. Very undemocratic process. And often happening behind closed doors and not receiving a lot of media coverage. But when you stack the bench with conservative or pro-corporate judges, you get certain results. I mean, it's just this is a significant, in my view, flaw in our system, and I don't have a perfect answer for it, but outrageous finding there from the Supreme Court, if you ask me. So here's to hoping it gets undone or somehow altered in a positive way. Another story I wanted to talk about today is obviously the infrastructure negotiations somewhat coming to a head with Joe Manchin trying to take a stand on the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. We're going to watch a short clip here on MSNBC. This is courtesy of Case Study QB. If you guys don't follow them on Twitter, Case Study QB, they post media clips all the time, and they're progressive. They say, these are for progressive independent media outlets to use. Shout out to them for keeping us up to date on what the mainstream media is saying. This is a clip from them about Joe Manchin on MSNBC.
Manchin of West Virginia is calling on his fellow Democrats to take a pause before advancing a historic $3.5 trillion budget plan. The senator is out with a new opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal titled, "Why I Won't Support Spending Another $3.5 Trillion." He writes this: instead of rushing to spend trillions on new government programs and additional stimulus funding, Congress should hit a strategic pause on the budget reconciliation legislation. We must allow for a complete reporting and analysis of the implications of a multi-trillion-dollar bill, what it will have, for this generation and the next. I, for one, won't support a $3.5 trillion bill or anywhere near that level of additional spending without greater clarity about why Congress chooses to ignore the serious effects inflation and debt have on existing government programs. The Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders was quick to respond to Senator Manchin's op-ed, arguing that both tracks of the infrastructure proposal must pass or neither will. This is what he tweeted: "Rebuilding our crumbling physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, is important. Rebuilding our crumbling human infrastructure, healthcare, education, climate change, is more important. No infrastructure bill without the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill."
So I really like Bernie's response there, because he doesn't address the nonsense that Joe was trying to deflect with, the inflation and debt, the kind of fear mongering that we talk about a lot that MMT tells us is nonsense. He didn't go down the path of trying to get in the weeds about that. All that he did is basically make a strong political stand and said, nope, you want to say no $3.5 trillion? I'm telling you no bipartisan bill without the $3.5 trillion. I like that. I hope they stand to it. I hope the progressives actually stand strong on this. And by the way, you guys, that Joe Manchin is taking this perspective while we're watching the flooding in New York, that he's taking this perspective while we see the devastation that Ida just reaped across the Gulf Coast, or wreaked rather, across the Gulf Coast, and carrying on up with flooding problems and torrential rain and all this stuff. While we're seeing, I mean, all of the things that I've talked about on a regular basis, the flooding in Europe, the fires in California and fires in Siberia, all this kind of stuff. While we're seeing this, while the very most alarmists among the climate scientists have been proven largely correct, Joe Manchin says, no, I don't want to spend that on environmental issues. I mean, I really genuinely, to somebody who does not want to spend money right now on environmental issues, whether that's out of a misunderstanding of how the funding mechanisms work or whether that's out of a political view, I don't know what to say to somebody who's so adamantly will deny science as to take that position. Reality does not care what you think of it. Reality also does not care what the political constrictions are, or constraints rather are. I don't know what to say to somebody who would agree with Joe Manchin on this, because it is so moronic. It is so detached from reality. It is so willfully ignorant that it's just hard to even know what to say. It reminds me of that meme with, is it like a dog or something that's like sitting in a house that's on fire and the dog says, "This is fine." That's Joe Manchin right now. How do you argue with that? I mean, it's that level of insanity. People have to accept basic reality in order to have any sort of substantive debate or discussion about anything, right? So what do you say in response to somebody who just says, no, I will willfully turn off my critical thinking and not acknowledge the reality that we're in? What do you say to somebody like that? I will condemn future generations to some sort of hellish climate Armageddon. What do you say to somebody like that? And I'm going to disingenuously fearmonger about spending mechanisms in order to get my way on this. Can you think of a more sinister position to take? I mean, I'm almost just at a loss of words. It's like arguing with a brick wall. It's like having someone tell you 2 + 2 is 8, and you have to say like, no, it's not. But they're so convinced that, what do you fucking say? It's insane, utterly insane. That this is the position that Manchin is taking. I hope that Bernie and the progressives will hold strong and say, no, we're not going forward with your bullshit bipartisan bill unless unless it's paired to, unless it's coupled with the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. And you guys, even if we get our way on this, it's probably going to be shredded to one degree or another through the reconciliation process. So there's no scenario where we get anything close to adequate policy here. The best case scenario is a grossly inadequate bill. But I strongly support us fighting for that over nothing. I mean, it's comical. If it weren't so terrifying and sad and disturbing, it would be comical what kind of a political situation we find ourselves in as it pertains to this infrastructure situation. So shame on Joe Manchin and any of the other corporate goons who would stand in the way of addressing the climate crisis and lie to their voters about why they're doing so. Shame on Joe Manchin. That's really all that I can think to say about that. I do want to show you guys here another story. This caught my eye. I'm sure many of you remember Ahmaud Arbery. This is in the Associated Press. Ex-prosecutor indicted for misconduct in Ahmaud Arbery death. A former Georgia prosecutor was indicted Thursday on misconduct charges alleging she used her position to shield the men who chased and killed Ahmaud Arbery from being charged with crimes immediately after the shootings. A grand jury in coastal Glenn County indicted former Brunswick Judicial Circuit District Attorney Jackie Johnson on a felony count of violating her oath of office and hindering a law enforcement officer, a misdemeanor. The indictment resulted from an investigation Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr requested last year into local prosecutors' handling of Arbery's slaying after a cell phone video of the shooting and a delay in charges sparked a national outcry. While an indictment was returned today, our file is not closed and we will continue to investigate in order to pursue justice, Carr, a Republican, said in a statement. So it's good to see something here, you guys, but this is a pattern. This is the kind of story that I feel like I could cover multiple times every single week. We kill 3 or 4 people per day, our police do in this country. Many of them suspect, right? Like I mean, the killing is suspect, where the justification for it is unreasonable at best. And then once it gets thrust into the legal system, you face similar obstacles and hurdles where the prosecutors work very closely with law enforcement offices and therefore are not too inclined to charge cops or to charge, in this case, right-wing nut jobs, right? But the culture of this is all the same. It's the same problem manifesting itself in different ways, whether it's actually police that commit the murder or whether it's some right-wing nut job who feels emboldened by our barbaric and racist society and by the barbaric and racist nature in which our law enforcement offices conduct themselves. So I'm glad to see some sort of charge being brought against this prosecutor, but it's, as always, it's too little too late. It's not much of an incentive for future prosecutors not to do the same. We need to defund police. We need to completely reform, like almost start from scratch, prosecutorial offices and how we prosecute in this country in general. The whole system, you guys, is designed to protect the property of the rich from the poor. Police were born out of slave catchers. The original law enforcement offices in this country were slave catchers. The star that you still see on sheriff badges comes from slave catchers. Those were the original cops in this country, right? The whole system is designed to be classist and then has a bunch of racism cooked into it. And all of that needs to change. And this kind of story, while in some sense heartening, is just too little too late and does not do anything to address the root of the problem. I hope that these charges stick. I hope this prosecutor gets in trouble for this. To have taken the position she took is pretty bad, you guys. There was documentation, there was video proof of what had happened. She continued to neglect to bring charges. She continued to shield these murderers, these racist, barbaric, maniacal murderers. You know, and yet it's so ironic to me because the same people who will do stuff like this are the people who call themselves like law and order prosecutors, who try to tout that they're all about like keeping their community safe and all this kind of nonsense, right? So just another disgusting story as it pertains to the way that the Black community is treated in this country, and how our legal and political and economic and social institutions handle it. I have a video here I'd like to show you guys from More Perfect Union. This is a protest about the way that OnlyFans and others have treated sex workers. We'll watch this clip, come back and discuss.
Workers' rights are under attack. What do we do? Stand up and fight back. Workers' rights are under attack. What do we do? Stand up and fight back.
We are here in front of this bank to protest MasterCard's discriminatory banking practices that have unfairly targeted content creators, sex workers, and people in the adult industry.
I'm here to help protest essentially the big banks that are partially responsible for what happened with OnlyFans. It's not really actually hurting people. The problematic content that's out there is such a small fraction of what's out there on Facebook, on Instagram, on so many other platforms. It's not because of the sex workers doing a legitimate job and working their butts off day in and day out.
People don't understand that these harmful practices that start out just by targeting sex workers actually have a ripple effect and really negatively impact content creators as a whole, even those who are creating non-sexual content, and internet censorship of any kind is like really harmful for everyone.
Let us profit as individuals and not have to be cogs in some machine.
Allow your capitalist greed to overcome your puritanical values. Get rid of these like moralistic practices that hurt everybody and actually stop them from making more money. So it's in their best interest to allow sex workers to keep on these payment platforms and be allowed to have access to these banking services.
I think the biggest misconception is the number of sex workers that there are. I mean, like myself, I'm a very casual, easygoing person. I could be your next door neighbor, but I'm a sex worker. I'm a successful sex worker, and I'm very proud of what I do and the people that I help with my content. I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a friend, I'm a neighbor, I'm anyone, but I also make adult content, and there should be nothing wrong with that.
Fantastic point there at the end, first of all. We tend to stigmatize and judge sex workers in a way that I think is entirely unfair, and we should not do that. So that's first of all. Second of all, when we talked about the OnlyFans situation, which thankfully OnlyFans decided to undo, by the way, when I covered that a couple of weeks ago, OnlyFans had decided to remove anything that they considered sexually explicit content, right? Which is a very dubious term. It can be defined however one might like to define it, and that left the corporate executives with the ability to define it however it was most expedient for their profits in the short term. One of the things I talked about was how systemic this kind of stigmatization can be. And I mentioned that banks have this sort of authority over businesses because they're consolidated enough that if they unanimously or close enough to unanimously decide that they're not going to support certain kinds of content or certain products or certain services, then they can actually sort of vote economically in a way that consumers cannot, right? We're often told, like, buy a better product, buy a product from a company that you approve of, a company whose business practices you approve of. We often don't have that choice. It might look like we have 10 or 15 choices while we're looking at some item in the grocery store, but all too often, all of those options trace back to like 3, 4, 5 companies that are all pretty horrible, conglomerates and, et cetera. The banks have the kind of leverage to affect change in this regard and to screw over entire professions of human beings. So I want to stand firmly with sex workers, and I want to stand firmly in opposition to the stigmatization of sex work. And what that woman was saying there at the end is so spot on. She's like, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a neighbor, I'm a friend. Why do you have to define me by what I do, right? It's a very odd thing that we cast this particular line of work out as somehow separate of or lesser than other forms of employment. and they mentioned there that MasterCard was getting involved and all these, like, this is insane. This is insane. This is draconian. This is displaying sort of our insecurities in our culture and how we sexualize everything in our culture, and then stigmatize the sexualization of everything in our culture. It's like we can't make our mind up about the damn thing, right? Big shout out to More Perfect Union while I'm at it. They are always covering labor organizing issues, strikes, protests, etc. They've been on top of a lot of very important stories that I've been able to bring you guys because of their reporting and because of the content that they put out. So if you're not following them, I really urge you to. Shout out to More Perfect Union. So at this point, I'd like to bring you guys the interview I did. This was recorded. This will play on Sunday, so this was recorded last Thursday, just a few days ago, with Heather Warburton. Heather is the lieutenant governor candidate for the Green Party in New Jersey. She's also the host of Wine, Women, and Revolution, a podcast that she does. And she is also going to be part of our upcoming podcast called The S Word. Heather sat down to have a fantastic conversation with me. We talked about New Jersey politics. We talked about ecological policies and justice. We talked about legalizing cannabis and a number of other things. So I'm excited to bring you guys this interview. And then we'll come back and close the show. So this is Heather Warburton, the lieutenant governor candidate in New Jersey from the Green Party. I'm very happy to be here today with Heather Warburton. Heather is a podcaster and a candidate for lieutenant governor in New Jersey in the Green Party. Heather has participated in our podcast, The S Word, and has her own podcast, Wine, Women, and Revolution. Heather, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here today.
So if you could just start by kind of introducing yourself and telling people about your journey into politics and what got you to where you are today.
It's been kind of a bumpy journey. I guess I've always been kind of an activist. I've always been someone who likes to get involved for things. I was organizing protests back when I was in like 5th or 6th grade. And after I became an adult, I tried to get involved with the Democratic Party. And then that didn't work out. They did not like to hear what I had to say. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't see you
Yes.
down at the bottom there. They did not like what I had to say in the Democratic Party at all. They wanted to hear none of what I was talking about because I'm talking about things like social justice and equity and things like that. So I kind of disengaged for a little while. Then I got involved with the Green Party in 2016 and been doing activisty stuff. There's a lot of different kinds of activism, environmental activism, LGBTQIA activism, just kind of running the gamut of activism and organizing in other people's campaigns. I campaign managed for other independent candidates before. And then finally, the governor candidate for New Jersey in the Green Party asked me if I'd be her running mate. And in a moment of weakness, I said yes. And it's all, been interesting since then.
Can you go ahead and plug that campaign really quick? I'm going to throw the website up on the page there, hoffman4gov.nj.com. But can you just talk briefly about what your guys' platform is, what you're running on, what you think New Jersey needs, and why you think that you would be the best candidates to win the gubernatorial seat?
All right. Well, how long do you have? Because I've got a lot of things I like to talk about. But our main campaign thing we're talking about is an eco-socialist Green New Deal. We understand that we are on the brink of a climate catastrophe. Just here in New Jersey, for the first time ever yesterday, we had a tornado emergency declared. We had an F3 tornado demolishing a housing development. We don't have F3 tornadoes here in New Jersey. We have in Philadelphia water that's filled up the Vine Street Expressway. It's up to where like the tippy top of where the signs are. There's massive flooding throughout the state of New Jersey. We know we're past the tipping point. We need to start acting like 20 years ago, but now we need to take such drastic action. And there's no other candidates that are talking about taking the kind of actions that's going to be required to get us out of this and to save lives. That's what it's about, is saving lives here. But we don't have to struggle to do this. We don't have to put in austerity. We don't have to, go backwards. We can provide good jobs for people, transitioning us into renewable energy while saving the planet. So it's a win-win situation, yet no one else is talking about it.
Unbelievable. And correct me if I'm wrong, but New Jersey is a relatively left-leaning state, at least compared to other states. Is that correct, or do I maybe have a misapprehension there?
Well, I'm a very far leftist. I'm a socialist. I'm openly a socialist. I'm on the podcast
Mhm.
called The S Word. It's a bunch of socialists talking about socialist stuff, right? So
Mhm.
compared to the mainstream, it's a Democrat state, right? It's the Democratic Party is very much in power here. And they're kind of a center right party, and then the Republicans are a far right party. So there is
Mhm.
really no left voices in New Jersey or in the country anywhere. So we're trying to represent that more left, but really it's people, right? That's who we're talking about. Working class people and getting them equity. People that have been disenfranchised, people that have been left out of mainstream paths to success and paths to happiness and paths to flourishing. People that have been held back. Those are the people we're talking about. So that shouldn't be a leftist thing, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I like to often kind of reframe certain issues. Like Medicare for All has, according to quite a few polls, something around 75% approval in the country. Well, that to me makes it by definition moderate. That's not leftist. That's by
Right.
definition, that's moderate. So I don't know. I think in many ways we need to sort of reframe the argument and take the view of extremeness away from some of our views. Do you get the idea that I think this is the case in many parts of the country. Do you get the idea that the constituents, your neighbors, your community, your societies in New Jersey, are in a different place than the political leadership and the powers that be, that sort of represent your state? Do you get the idea that these ideas are popular among the populace and they just haven't been able to sort of get through the hurdles of power yet?
Oh, absolutely. Because money talks in all elections, right? That's how people get elected is by having massive amounts of money. And people that have been done well in that system don't want to change that system. And those are the people that are getting elected, right? Those are the people that flourish in the system are the ones who either are taking huge amounts of finance donations and huge amounts of corporate donations to their campaign, and they're happy with how things are, whereas we
Mhm.
take no corporate money for our campaign. So we're looking out for people. And I think that's an important distinction, that you have to understand where politicians are getting their donations from and who it is that they're going to represent when they're elected. Our governor in New Jersey is a finance, banking millionaire. He financed his own campaign back in 2016. He donated $1 million to his own campaign. We didn't do that.
Yeah, I think most of the candidates that I tend to support cannot do that. I also one of the things I kind of, as an outsider, understand about New Jersey, and please again correct me if I'm wrong, or provide whatever nuance is required. New Jersey houses a lot of the pharmaceutical companies. Is that correct? And
Yes.
provides large tax breaks for them and sort of a comfortable financial environment for them to operate within. Can you talk a little bit about what impact that has on your state and what you guys might do about it if you were to win the seat?
Yeah, well, Johnson's& and Johnson's is in New Jersey. That's where they're out of. That's where their, corporate offices are, and they donate massive amounts to campaigns. But there's a lot of just corporate coddling that happens in New Jersey, whereas we're not making companies pay their fair share in New Jersey. For example, there was just a settlement back when Chris Christie was governor for massive amounts of environmental damage that had been done to the state, because people, when they think of New Jersey, even though I'm from South Jersey and it's different down here, they think of lots of petrochemical refineries and they think
Mm,
of super packed and crowded people and lots of pollution. And there has been historically lots of pollution and lots of damage done. So there was a settlement reached where some of the polluters were going to be forced to pay, this fairly large settlement. And Chris Christie said, no, no, you don't have to pay all that, and settled it for pennies on the dollar of what these
mm,
companies should be paying to remediate the damage they've already done to the state. And that kind
mhm.
of stuff happens all the time.
I'm kind of curious how Chris Christie even came to power in New Jersey. Can you maybe explain some of those dynamics? I mean, how does someone, he's not just a Republican, he's kind of an insane Republican. How does he end up end up in the governor's seat there?
Well, I won't disagree with you that he's kind of an insane Republican. We in New Jersey have a tendency not to like our governors. So whoever the current sitting governor is, we kind of don't like them.
I
Chris
see.
Christie ran against Corzine, who was another, a highly elite millionaire type person. Another person who funded his own campaign. So Chris Christie comes in there and he's kind of got this big attitude. And that's sort of a thing in New Jersey. We kind of have big attitudes here. He comes in and he sounds like he's a straight talker, right? He sounds like he's somebody you'd go out and have a beer with, and that he's going to look out for you because he sounds like a real guy. But that, of course, he starts implementing all these crazy policies and crazy things. And then the people who voted for him even started to hate him because, we hate our governors in New Jersey.
Goes both ways, huh? I kind of see some similarities there. I don't mean to make the comparison that seems to always get made, but like I think that kind of reminds me a little bit of Trump, as horrendous and nasty as a lot of the things he was saying were and are. I think it was very clear to people that like no political operative is telling him to say these things. It comes off authentic because it is so nasty and so sinister. And, is there an element of people just being tired of the sort of the establishment machine and how predictable and repetitive it is, and sort of, like Hillary, for example, it seems like everything she says, like a dozen strategists sat there and had her recite it 200 times until they thought she had it. Like, it just feels so theatrical. Do you think there's an element where people in New Jersey are tired of that version of politics?
Absolutely. And New Jersey is one of the worst states for machine politics. If you're going to participate in one of the two-party primaries, and then you're on the Democrat side, the local party bosses actually pick we have a thing called the ballot line, where all the candidates that they want you to vote for appear in column A. And then everybody else gets shuffled further and further down the ballot until you're either the non-liked candidate, or if you're, God forbid, a third party candidate, you're down in ballot Siberia, basically, where no one even looks at that end of the ballot. And it's party bosses get to pick in the primaries who goes in that first column. And if you're in that first column, then it's almost guaranteed that you're going to win the race that you're in. So that's pretty crazy. And I think we're the only state in the country that does things like that. So it's a very
inherently
entrenched
undemocratic.
system.
That's outrageous.
And just to say, like, why I left the Democratic Party, there was a perfect example of, I know a gentleman who was trying to run for county clerk this year in the Democratic Party to get rid of that ballot line. That was his real only thing he was talking about. And he obviously didn't get in column A because he wasn't the establishment candidate. But Phil Murphy, the governor, who, we're running against, actually endorsed a county clerk. He'd never done this before, but he endorsed another candidate for county clerk just because they didn't want the ballot line to change.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And this wasn't like a huge, that seems to me that would be like the story of the decade. And like, that's insane. That's manipulation to a degree that I can hardly even imagine.
And this is a county clerk. This is basically a secretarial position almost.
Right.
They record deeds and wills, and the only power they have is they can design the ballot and how it looks. And he was trying to change it so that there wasn't these lines and columns. It was just, okay, here's all the candidates for governor. Here's all the candidates for county commissioner. And they bent over backwards to keep him from being elected. That's why I'm not a Democrat.
I fully endorse that decision if that's how things go there. I mean, that's insane. So you highlight climate as a core piece of your agenda. Can you talk a little bit about, I've been kind of astonished to see, although this is one of those things where it's kind of intellectually, it can be expected or predictable, but then it's also viscerally stunning to see what happens around the world. I mean, we have Hurricane Ida, obviously, which I'm no climate scientist, but I understand it, climate change contributed to its ability to intensify as quickly as it did. The forest fires in California, or up in my state in Washington, or up in BC in Canada. We saw the flooding in Europe. We see the fires in Siberia and permafrost melting. And I mean, it feels like every day there's some new story coming out that's bad news, or that kind of proves the most alarmist scientists correct. The flooding in New York right now that I've been seeing the last couple of days, or last day or so. Can you just talk about how quickly this has escalated, and how it seems to me that even the realistic proposals that we see in our current political environment don't even go nearly far enough. Even the best proposals that we see are compromises of a sort. Can you just talk about how sort of disconnected reality and the political environment are in this regard?
It's absolutely ridiculous. You can't compromise with the rising tide and the rising sea level. That it's not interested in your compromise position.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to need to do if we want to, I mean, there's so much damage that's locked in. There's nothing we can do about that. But if we want to prevent even further, more devastating impacts, then we need to be irrational. We need to be not, thinking, how can we, do this, and how can we incrementally do this. We
Mm-hmm.
need a mobilization larger than World War II. And that was a huge mobilization. The entire society got involved. We need something larger than that if we're going to do this in time. We need to transition everyone who's working in a fossil fuel job, get them training, get them placed into positions of generating renewable infrastructure. We need to raise our roads. We need to make decisions about if we're going to withdraw from coastal communities. I just saw a study from Rutgers, which is one of a large university here in New Jersey, that here in South Jersey, by 2050, we can expect another 11 inches of sea level rise. And that was with an 83% confidence they said that. Now, Phil Murphy's goal to get us off of fossil fuels is 2050. That's his goal number. And that's already another almost a foot of sea level rise by then.
Oh my God. I didn't even know that things were getting to that extent. I mean, it just, like I said, it seems like these stories every day, it seems like there's some new prediction that is worse than we even thought. That's absolutely outrageous. So even though you guys are running for a state position, I do want to talk briefly about a federal policy that could be used as a mechanism for this, the jobs guarantee, which could be used to employ people who desperately need that employment, and then to provide not just services that have little to do with climate for our communities, which we desperately need, but also to transition to a greener energy grid and put in place policies that might help us combat this climate issue. Can you talk about how that would be helpful, and how we could actually get to a place of, I'd say better late than never, I suppose, like to address this as best as we possibly can?
Right. Well, you may not find a lot of people that openly say that they're MMTers in the Green
Mm-hmm.
Party, but I'm definitely one of those people that is. So that's sort of why, we absolutely support Medicare for all, but we're not running on Medicare for all for a state level. We're running on Medicare, supplementing Medicare if we need to,
Mm-hmm.
or making sure that everyone's being covered. So we're not really making that a state, we're not trying to do that on a state level. And we're trying to do as much as we can on a state level, but, even if New Jersey is perfect and we implemented every single progressive policy we could think of to battle climate change, we need the rest of the country to come with us. There's only
Yep.
so much power. Even if the governorship in New Jersey is one of the most powerful governors in the country, there's a limit to what we can do. We need the federal government to do it with us. And unless New Jersey is going to secede from the union and become a currency issuer, it's not that easy. We have to pay for it with taxpayer dollars. And the federal government does not have those same limitations that we have. So, as much as we're going to do here, and we're going to be very active in battling catastrophic climate change, it's a big job. Like I said, a World War II size organization that's got to be paid for on a federal level.
Yeah, no one person, the most powerful people in the world, can't individually change this. This needs to be a cooperative effort in solidarity with our fellow humans. I am thrilled to hear that you have an understanding of the race to the bottom and MMT and these kinds of things. We need governors to understand this, and state legislative bodies to understand it just as much as we need federal officials to understand that. Another policy that you mentioned as kind of a top priority is legalization of marijuana. And can you go into how it's not just enough to legalize or decriminalize weed? It needs to be done properly in a way that is actually fair to those who have been unjustly punished.
Right. Well, the war on drugs has always historically, for the past, I think almost a century now, has been a war on Black and brown people. Those
Mhm.
are who disproportionately go to jail. People who look like me with my complexion do not spend time in jail for having a joint. Whereas
Mhm.
people, Black and brown members of our community are spending decades in jail, if not life in jail, for small amounts of something that now we've decided, oh, well, that's fine. That's
Mhm.
perfectly legal. Now that rich white guys want to make a lot of money off of it, it's not an issue
Mhm.
anymore. But we still have people sitting in jail and people still getting arrested. I know people. We voted to legalize it in the state of New Jersey. It's a constitutional ballot amendment. We passed almost 2-1 with voters in the state of New Jersey. And yet, still, as little as a month ago, I know people that are still getting arrested because they're clearing a path for corporate cannabis. There's no home grow in New Jersey. There's no edibles
Mhm.
in New Jersey. There's just this corporate cannabis, which currently it's just medical is all you can buy. There is no legal market for recreational cannabis. And the medical cannabis you can get in New Jersey is extremely low quality. One
Mhm.
local dispensary has mold in their product, and there's actually been a lawsuit filed against them for having mold in their product. And most of it, there's one legal dispensary that will give you, or at least gives me, a headache every time I purchase from there. So these are not high quality cannabis things that you can get. And now imagine somebody who, this is a medical program, has lung cancer and is now smoking something with mold in it.
Oh my God, that ought to be illegal. I mean, that's absolutely outrageous. If that was in our food or any other, like, we would say that needs to be regulated out of existence. That's insane. Um, yeah,
Right. So, and we want to open a pathway for the people who have been in the industry, the legacy industry that most people have been buying their weed from now since forever. Now they deserve a foot in the door. They deserve some kind of repairing of damage that we've done to their communities. So they should get
yeah.
first dibs on this new industry. They go first. Then every other Black and brown person can go next because they're the victims of the war on drugs. Then other
100%.
marginalized people. And then finally, the rich white guys can go last. It can
Yeah.
trickle down to them.
I tend to completely agree with that. Yes. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about I think there's a misconception around drug laws in general, not just marijuana, that they come out of some sort of place of science or like medical, authority. And I think a lot of people hold that belief that, well, we must have just decided, the experts must have realized this is bad for society. No, it was actually just out and out racism. The first drug laws in this country were anti-Chinese bigotry, where white people didn't want their daughters fornicating with Chinese men, so they banned opium. That's the first drug laws in the country. One of Nixon's aides, I wish I could remember his name, famously said, and forgive the crassness of this quote, I'm giving it to you as direct as possible, that we keep weed illegal because the hippies use it, and we keep heroin illegal because the blacks use it, and neither of them is voting for us. That's not at all surrounding science or health. That's out and out political and out racism. Can you talk about some of the misconceptions that have led us to the place that we're at with drug laws, and why they desperately need to be undone at a base level, not just at a we'll decriminalize. You know what I mean?
Well, it goes back even before Nixon that there was a guy named Harry Anslinger who kind of
Mhm.
was who originated the war on drugs. And your quote that you mentioned was horrible. He had equally horrible quotes. He said things like that we needed to get rid of cannabis because if a black man smoked cannabis, then he would have the courage to look a white man in the eye. This is not
Whoa.
secret information. He said this. This is where his heart was with what he was trying to do. And he wanted to criminalize it so that they could keep black and brown people away from white people. This was designed to funnel people into prison. This was designed because when people are in prison, They're a commodity that can be sold. They're a commodity that can be used. You know that we abolished slavery except for people in prison.
Mhm,
When people are in
mhm.
prison, they can be forced to work for nothing or pennies on the dollar. And this isn't by accident that this was done. It's absolutely intentional that it was done. So, the entire basis of our war on drugs is to exploit labor from people against their will and rob people of their lives.
That's insane. So, and it's not just the economic. We're going to enslave you this way. Effectively, we're going to force you into forced labor. It's also a form of sort of demagoguery, where it's like we're gonna divide races up on this wedge. That's deplorable to a degree I can't even begin to express.
And,
So,
there's the Reefer Madness, right? That was a movie that
uh-huh.
was put out that just lied about things, and medical professionals at the time are like, "No, what you're saying isn't right. Stop doing that." Like, they come up with, they just make up stories like, "Oh, and this person smoked a joint and killed their entire family." Like, it was just lies. The entire war on drugs is built on lies and on hurting people. So, we
And by the
need to
way,
totally reform things.
who's actually more likely to come home and kill their family? Is it the drunk or the stoner? I think it's pretty obvious. And I'm not advocating to make alcohol illegal. I'm just pointing out how disingenuous that narrative would seem to be to me. Tobacco and alcohol, two of the most dangerous substances and two of the most addictive substances that we know of, and they no problem there culturally. It seems to just be targeted to certain drugs
Whereas
or
cannabis is
substances.
actually a medicine. It makes
Yes.
people better, and that was what was criminalized.
Yeah.
It's insane.
I think there's actually something to that in the sense that, like, you guys have big pharma there in New Jersey. I think they're threatened by this. I think that, they don't want people to have an alternative option that does show efficacy, right? I think a lot of alternative medicine falls into a category of sort of pseudoscience, but marijuana is not in that category whatsoever. This is known, medicine for a lot of things. So I think big industry is threatened by marijuana in many ways.
Yeah,
Is
and
that the case in New Jersey?
the only reason we don't have more data to back it up is because it's illegal on a federal level, so people
Mm,
can't run studies on it.
mm.
That
So,
big people can't funnel lots of money into running studies on it to show how effective it is. So a lot of it still has to be anecdotal or done in studies that are very under the radar and not like a federal government study that shows how beneficial it is. But when you talk
mm,
to people that have used cannabis or have used mushrooms, there are people that had very severe depression that have used mushrooms that
yep.
were cured of their depression. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that you can find. But unfortunately, as long as things are illegal, we can't have large scale studies on them.
Yeah.
But everyone you talk to will say, "This changed my life." The fact I'm here, sitting here having an interview with you right now, as someone who suffers from severe social anxiety, someone who I'm running for lieutenant governor, as someone who suffers from severe social anxiety, you know,
Well, you
this is
seem very
proof.
charismatic and charming to me for whatever that is worth.
Thank you.
But yeah, I get what you're saying, and I actually I've been honest with my audience about this too. I smoke almost every night. I'm in Washington State. It's legal here. And it's if you think I'm someone from the Reefer Madness movie, see me after the interview. You know what I mean? I'm quite offended by that. I think all of this has kind of been propaganda to a pretty egregious extent. I wanted to pivot to get your attention or your opinion rather on media, because you're involved in podcasts and things as well. And I'm curious, the S word I think kind of hits on something that I think is a very important topic, which is how successfully certain words have been smeared and how progressive people have been kind of cast out as extremists and I think unfairly framed. Can you talk a little bit about how independent media can combat that and what you think needs to happen among sort of on the ground at the community level? How do we get through those kinds of narratives?
Well, the reason I started an independent media company was partially because we couldn't get covered, the Green Party couldn't get covered in any of the larger mainstream media, as it were, for all the stuff we were doing. We were out in the streets doing activism. Like, whenever there was an event that needed people at it, the Green Party has been there in the streets. We've been running candidates up and down the ballot in New Jersey. never get any media coverage. And when horrible things are done to the Green Party, still crickets, no media coverage. So that's part of why I started an independent media company. Several years ago, I started a different media company, but just about a year ago now, I launched my own solo media company, Create Your Future Productions, which is where my Wine, Women, and Revolution show is now homed. And it's just this void of reporting on things. Probably I'd say it's maybe been like about a year and a half or so ago. There was a convention that was being held in South Jersey. And some of the people that were speakers at this convention were pedophilia advocates
Oh
who have
my
now
God.
later been arrested for it. There were people that were Holocaust deniers who have now been arrested for hate speech. But at the time, they were just like, this is just a free speech conference. We have to respect free speech. And so a bunch of us organized and were like, okay, there's nothing we can do about it, but we're going to protest. We're going to show up outside and be like, we don't welcome these people in our community. And we, the media, reported on how horrible we were. We're sitting there peacefully
Oh.
in a park across the street from someone who is advocating pedophilia, but we were reported on as the bad guys. So there's a void of good media, especially that understands and respects people that are trying to change things on a grassroots level. So we need grassroots media.
Yeah, that's quite a story. My God. I mean, if you want to deny history, go sit in your own damn house and deny history. Don't come to our convention and deny history or
Yeah,
espouse
this woman was
bigotry.
saying there was no such thing as extermination camps. That was part of what she
Oh
said.
God.
And, you can understand why we did not want these women or this woman or these people in our community.
That's like bottomless ignorance is what that is. That's unbelievable. Yeah, wow. Can you talk just a little bit about your podcast and what topics you cover and what purpose you have in doing it, what you'd like to achieve with it?
Well, it's a socialist podcast. If you look up, my logo is actually a hammer and sickle. I embrace the word communism. I embrace the word socialism. I talk about those words openly and happily. I will label myself a socialist all day long. It's not a bad word to me. It's just a description of what I am. So part of it is trying to break that stigma and be like, I'm your friendly next door neighborhood communist. I bake you cookies and, hand you some Karl Marx. So that's kind of the persona I take on in the show. But we cover really hard hitting topics a lot. We've talked about medical racism. We've talked about education and equitable education. We've talked about local issues. There was a local mother, the only Black child in her class, and the teacher of that child told the child there were some Black people who wanted to be slaves. So
Oh.
we kind of exposed that story and covered that. It runs the gamut. Environmental things, local organizing groups. There's a group of Sandy survivors who started an organizing group. So I had them on to talk about sort of what their goals were and what they were trying to accomplish. And we do some fun things too. I've had comedians on. I have a lot of authors on. I had an author who wrote a book called Why Women Had Better Sex Under Socialism. So that was a really fun interview.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I do think and perhaps I'm often guilty of this, but I think irony and humor and sarcasm are actually really necessary tools for revolutionaries to embrace. Can you talk a little bit about that? How literature and comedy and art and having some irony and some humor can actually help to bring people on board?
Well, my day job, everything that we've been talking about is stuff I don't get paid for, right? This is all the stuff I do as a passion project. And my day job is a passion project too, but I'm an artist. That's what I do. I'm a photographer and visual artist. I have a show coming up in just about a week and a half. But I've actually figured out how to fuse, and I didn't do this for a long time, but I figured out how to fuse activism into my art. So a lot of my recent art I've been making is stuff that's talking about catastrophic climate change or is addressing isolation and racism. So making something beautiful kind of triggers a different part of somebody's brain when they're engaging with a subject matter than just me standing there and lecturing you. Might get kind of
Mhm.
boring. People have a tendency to tune out even with people they agree with if they've heard
Mhm.
something before or you've been going on for too long. So there's a lot of, I think it's important to trigger all the different parts of a brain when you're trying to communicate with someone. So I think memes are important. I don't
Mhm.
dismiss the value of them. I think telling jokes is important. Anything that lights up your brain and lets you engage with what's really important issues. And if you just talk about the doom and gloom all the time and there's never a moment of lightness, that can lead to despair. And despair leads to
Mhm.
feelings of helplessness. So I even, no matter how dark the subject is, and we've had some really dark subjects on the show, I like to try to find some lightness or some moment of growth or something that can end people with like, "Okay, this was horrible, but maybe I can use this to make a change." I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah. I
important.
think there are certain topics where it's like you either gonna laugh or you're gonna cry, right? And it's like
Exactly.
perhaps laughing is the more effective way to approach it at times. Um, Yeah, can you talk about how, because I've often run into this. I think people are very hardened in their own views and tend to sort of shut you off if you have any disagreement, even if you express it in a very kind way, or you try to be, effective in how you communicate it instead of just lecturing somebody or whatever. How what's the psychology there in your view? How do we best get through to people who may be very averse to being told they might be wrong about something? And to what extent is that maybe true in New Jersey? What's your experience with trying to get through to sort of hardened political people?
No, it's really hard. And science has told us that people perceive an attack on their core belief structure the same as if they were being physically attacked. Like they
Mhm.
actually have the same physical responses as if like there was a tiger over there coming at you. They
Mhm.
almost can't hear what you're saying. And just presenting more evidence and presenting a better argument, no matter how kind the argument is. Oh, why are you attacking me? How can you be doing that to me? You're such a horrible person, and they shut down and then they withdraw and you've lost your moment.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there are some cases I'm not a perfect person and sometimes I have gone in for the digs and to be negative, but I see that that is not a great way of engaging with people. You have to engage them with kindness and you have to try to slip past their defenses as it were. I found a great technique is agreeing with the person and
Yeah.
then steering them around to what you want them to say. And then once you agree with them about something, and they think that you're still agreeing with them, even when you are redirecting that. So
Mhm.
that's kind of a weird thing that psychological thing that works is finding that common ground, no matter how small that common ground is. There's something like, oh, I breathe oxygen too. Let's talk about how great breathing oxygen is.
Yes, yes. I also like water. Yes, I think that's a great another tool I like is to not in a confrontational way or a combative way, but ask questions to force somebody to reveal their own contradictions, and then they
Mhm.
think they're realizing it instead of you telling it to them, right? There are some of these techniques that can be used. Do you find that words like socialism and communism, to kind of tie it into an earlier discussion, make people put that wall up, or do you find people are somewhat open to talking about these concepts, and what they actually mean and why they actually have value?
I think there's a gamut of people. Some people will shut down. I mean, they're calling Hillary Clinton a communist.
Yeah, yeah.
So, those people are going to be really hard to get them. When I say I'm a communist, they just think that means I'm like Hillary Clinton. But when I go up to somebody and say, I'm a communist, and that's how I introduce myself, there's a moment of like, what? What did you just
Yeah,
say?
yeah,
And that's your moment, right? In that initial confusion, like you show them, like, I'm not that weird. Like, I have a mortgage. I live in the suburbs. Like, here's my
yeah.
dog. It's not that weird. Here's what I'm about. And like that initial like moment of confusion, you can hit them and you can bring them in. And I've had people that really have opened up. Like, I've never had somebody introduce themselves to me as a communist before. That's really weird for me, but you're kind of awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Putting a face to it in a sense instead of them reading a book about the gulag or some shit where they can think of it in an abstract way and allow the propaganda to kind of take hold. Um, So, how do you think these tie into electoral politics? Because I think there's a big sort of argument or debate on the left, and I don't think there's a perfect answer to it. I think I'm of the view that we use any tool at our disposal, but I think there are a lot of people on the left who are just so beaten down by and worn out by electoral politics that they just say, no, I'm fucking done with that. Put that away. I'm going to focus on marches and protests and strikes. And I want to be clear, I think that direct action is more effective at actually achieving change. But to me, these are all tools that we should use. And clearly you're running for lieutenant governor, so you on some level must agree. But can you talk about the space for both to be effective and how they can work together and things like this and where we should be putting our focus?
Absolutely. And I would not tell anyone if the system has left you behind and you don't understand why there's anything in it for you. You're not selfish, you're not greedy, you're commenting on a reality of the system. The system isn't for you. You're not wrong in that. But, and here's why I run. I'm not expecting I'm probably not going to win. It would take pretty much a miracle for me to win. Our campaign war chest is not even a fraction of the big parties. So here's why I run as a Green Party person. That I see when Green Party voices or when leftist voices are included in things, then that has an impact. I've seen our candidates in debates, like when you go to a debate, especially if you're someone's campaign manager, and they ask the group questions, you seed it with your questions for your candidate. And I've seen our candidates up on that stage completely controlling the narrative of the entire debate about things that would never get talked about. And sometimes what they say, because the other politicians are there, they're hearing us, the people are there, they're hearing us. Sometimes the things we say get stolen by the two-party system. And I know a lot of people, they're like, oh, they steal all of our good ideas. But we're getting our good ideas in place. So that's a space that you can be in, putting your ideas into it. We're the only candidate, for example, that are talking about reparations in the state of New Jersey. The Democrats and the Republicans are not going to talk about reparations. And we're here like, this is, I think, a conversation we need to have. Now, we can't say what reparations are because we're two white women. But we can certainly talk about it's something that needs to happen. And that this is a discussion we need to start having on a not just New Jersey, but a national basis.
Yeah.
So you can really bring in subjects that will be totally ignored. But activism is important. Local organizing is important. And that's another thing that when you're a candidate for office, you can just walk up and start talking to people. If you go up to a stranger on the subway or wherever you are, or in a park, and be like, I want to talk to you about climate change. They'll be like, ew, go away. But if you hand them a palm card with your picture on it and be like, I'm running for lieutenant governor, suddenly they're like, okay, I'm used to people talking to me in this fashion. So that gets you a couple of seconds of where they're like not calling the cops on you. They're actually listening. It gives you a certain respectability that otherwise, for some reason, they wouldn't give you.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about, I've found that there's a certain element of like very unproductive kind of nihilism on the left, where there's this tendency to, I think we view politics too much as an individual thing, where we look at politics through individual human beings and then we cast them into good or bad category and then sort of work backwards from that. And like an example I would give, I certainly don't, I'm no Joe Biden fan, okay? I like that he pulled out of Afghanistan, but it seems like among many on the left, and I know there's nuanced details around the edges of how thorough that pullout actually was, all these kind of things. But it seems to me that when a bad person or someone that's been deemed bad, a bad actor, does something good, we can't acknowledge it. And that to me would be a barrier to actually getting our agenda done, in kind of the way that you just talked about, where sometimes major candidates will actually take on the policies from leftists. And it seems to me that some people want to like hold on to their personal view of an individual and not like celebrate that we might have actually done something good if someone that we deem as bad does it. Do you kind of see what I mean? I don't know how we might break through some of that nihilism, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think we have to give people the opportunity to not disappoint us. They probably will. You're probably
Mhm.
right. They're probably going to disappoint you. But I have in my local congressional district, one of the worst representatives in my local congressional district, Jeff Van Drew, who you might know on a national level, because I
Mhm.
think John Oliver made fun of him of like, why do you have a Klan rally in your pocket? Was a joke he made about him one time. He was a Democrat-ish, and then became a Republican and pledged his undying support to Trump. So this is someone I've opposed every chance I've gotten. I ran a candidate against him when he was running for Congress.
Mhm.
I generally don't like the guy, but I still take meetings with him and I still talk to him and I give him yet the opportunity. Now, he'll probably disappoint me again, but I never stop giving him that opportunity to disappoint me. I still
Mhm.
talk about things with him, and especially now that I'm a candidate, I'm at a lot of events with him, and I go up and I talk to him, and I be like, "Hey, when are we gonna get Medicare for all?" Or,
Mhm.
I try to be fairly friendly with him even though I don't particularly like him, and I think he's one of the worst representatives in the country, but, I have to talk to him. He's who my representative is, and what he does with what I say to him is on him, but I'm at least giving him that chance.
I really like that attitude. How do you think we can get the general populace to maybe come along with that? Because I have to say, one thing that drives me nuts on like leftist Twitter, and maybe I'm in a bit of a bubble here, but on lefty Twitter, it really seems like there's this kind of very repetitive narrative that certain people will kind of just tweet the same things over and over again in different ways. Joe Biden bad, Democrats bad, and it just at a certain point, it's kind of to me, it's kind of like, well, if you don't see that, you're like way behind anyway. So why are we just regurgitating the same thing over and over again instead of talking about the issues and talking about, the actual ways that we could implement our policy? How do you think we can get some more, like inject some substance into the discourse, I suppose would be a way to put it.
Well, I think it's important. We think of politicians as being something other than people, right? When
Mm-hmm.
really there are employees. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to view them not as our leaders, but as our employees. And there are employees that are doing a bad job. So we need
Mm-hmm.
to engage with them constantly. We don't give them a moment of rest or a moment of peace until they're doing what you want them to do. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important, like, and that's not specifically electoral politics. That's just demanding something from your employees. And I would never demand something from my actual employees, but, these are people that are destroying the world.
Yeah, yeah.
My actual employees, I don't even really wanna have employees because, communist, but, these people are our employees that they're trying to make us a better as a country, at least that's what they're supposed to be doing. Now, we can debate all day of whether or not that's
Sure.
working out, but that's who we have, that's who we've employed. So I'm gonna be showing up constantly outside of their doors or at their rallies. And, I expect people to do that. If I get elected, show up at any event I'm speaking
Yes.
at, yell at me, engage with me, call me an asshole, that's fine, but engage
Yes.
because you need those conversations. Because even if I get elected, I'm not necessarily going to have the best answer for everything. The best answers are community sourced, right? You might call it a line struggle, you might call it whatever in your personal nomenclature, but the best ideas come from a group of people because people know what they need. People know what their communities need. And if your representative isn't from your community, he's probably not going to come up with the best solutions. Now, he may not care, but just being annoying enough is the best you've got right now. And then you vote for people like me who actually will listen to what you have to say.
Absolutely, yes. Second that last part. Do you see optimism to break through some of this sort of perpetual negativity, or because I think the system almost, we could elect a perfect president, for example. We could elect literally the perfect left-wing human being to be president, however that may be described to you or any particular viewer at home. And that person would be working within a system where they literally could not do everything that they wanted to do. And I think that leads to this sort of perpetual disappointment and beats us down. Do you see optimism of a populace perhaps being able to break out of that mentality and continue to be as productive as possible?
And that's kind of you're re-asking a question I get asked all the time of how are you going to accomplish things without
Mm-hmm.
allies in Congress or allies in the legislature? And I'm like, my allies are the people in the streets. So when
Mm,
we elect these people that are, flawed individuals, even I'm a flawed individual, I'm going to say to my allies in the streets, come on, let's go. If,
mm,
you elected me and these are the people that are standing in your way, let's get them.
mm-hmm.
I'll be
I
in the
really like that
streets
answer.
with you marching against people that are my associates in the legislature if need be. I'll be the first person in front with a bullhorn.
Well, I love that answer. And I have to say, I trust you a little bit more than I trusted Obama when he said he would put on his walking boots and march with teachers.
I
In a
have a
similar vein.
bullhorn if need be. I already got it. So.
Hey, you're already equipped. This is fantastic. And lastly, Heather, can you just kind of plug where can people find your podcast? Where can people find your work and keep up with what you're doing?
All right. Well, first, you can find us on hoffmanforgovnj.com. We're also on all the social medias. Our campaigns are. We're on Facebook, Twitter. We have a TikTok. And admittedly, now it's our campaign interns that run the TikTok. But, it's basically us dancing with various things on our TikTok. But we have all the social media, so you can find us there. Me personally, you can find my show. It's on hiatus until after the campaign, but I've got a pretty good backlog of shows. You can find my network, yourfuturecreator.com. That's where you can download my podcast. My podcast is also on all the podcasts. It's on Apple, it's on Google, it's on iTunes. It's, everywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find it there. But if you want to go direct to the source, that's my source. I'm also in the process, while running for governor, of filming a documentary. So
Oh, that's
that's another way
fantastic.
that you can engage with me. Like I said, I'm an artist. That's my day job. I'm filming a documentary about an associate of mine who was a pastor in Texas who realized in his late 40s he was gay. And
Mm,
so it's telling the story of him coming to terms with being a Texas pastor in a
mm-hmm.
place that kind of hates him and
Mm-hmm.
had wanted nothing to do with him. And he was married. He had a number of kids. So it's about living your authentic self. So that's in production now. Every week I'm going out and meeting with him in his church. Spoilers. He's married to an amazing man and has a church in New Jersey now. So, that's another way you can engage with my content. And that's another way we need donations for that because I have to go to Texas and talk to the people that were part of his story that are still in Texas. And, it's a challenging place, Texas, right now.
Yes, it is. That's for sure. I mean, just as the last couple of days have shown, the Supreme Court deciding that women don't have autonomy over their own reproductive decisions. And lastly, Heather, what might, if I have any viewers in New Jersey, what might they be able to do for your guys' campaign? Or do you have infrastructure on the ground? Can people volunteer? What can people do?
Absolutely. Well, first, you can always donate. If you go onto that website, we have a donate tab. You can donate anything that helps us buy yard signs, that helps us buy palm cards that we hand out to people. But we have great staff. I've never had a better staff than we have this year. We have regional directors in each of the regions of New Jersey. We have research teams. We have op-ed teams. We have canvassing teams. We have phone bankers. The staff, I basically don't even need to be there half the time. Our staff is so good. And we have a really amazing, and I think it's important to say that our staff is almost entirely youth led. Our
Mm,
campaign manager is in college. Some of our regional directors are in high school. We are
mm,
really focused on reaching out to people that aren't normally heard in politics. And we think it's important that, I might be an older person compared to the rest of my campaign team, but I actively engage with people that have the most at stake in this catastrophic climate change or, horrible laws that are put in place are going to haunt them longer than it's going to haunt me. So their voices are absolutely. So if you're a young person, we want you there. But even if you're an older person, and we still want you, there's roles for everyone. And we have a really big team for a Green Party team. I unfortunately don't even know every single intern because we get more and more interns every week. We've actually stole interns from the Republicans campaign.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. And yeah, I guess you could say that's fortunate or unfortunate. Like you have enough interns that you can't keep. That's fantastic in one sense, right? Well, Heather, thank you so much for being here today. I think this was a fantastic conversation. I encourage everybody to check out Heather's work and follow her work going forward. And I hope we can do this again sometime soon. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you. We'll definitely do it again. So I thought that was a really fantastic interview, you guys. I urge you to check out Heather's other work and follow her content. And I had the website up there if you're interested in learning more about her campaign. Redo that. So I thought that was a really fantastic interview. Thanks to Heather for taking the time. I had her website up there on the screen, or her campaign website, rather, if you're interested in learning more about the campaign that they're running there in New Jersey. I also urge you to check out her content, her podcasts, and things like that. And keep an eye out for the S Word, which she's going to be a part of when we start to release that podcast as well. So thank you all for tuning in today. I know it was a little bit of a shorter show than usual. I'm hoping to be able to bring you some content next week. Once more, I want to urge you all to check out realprogressives.org to find other podcasts and articles. You can find our Patreon there if you'd like to donate to us, help us out. You can also learn more about our organization, what our goals are, and how we operate, that kind of thing. And also want to tout the New Untouchables. Every Sunday night, we have a new episode of the New Untouchables, which talks about financial fraud and sort of tells the story of how, like, the inner workings of how this kind of fraud operates. It's a very important podcast. To understand this kind of corruption is critical. So urge you all to check that out tonight and every Sunday. And if you haven't seen previous episodes, make sure that you go to our website and find those. All sorts of other great content, you guys. The Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine, comes out on Saturday mornings. The Up and Up with Jody Newell comes out on Fridays. MMT Mondays with Caleb Mood comes out on Mondays. Make sure that you're not missing out on our plethora of fantastic content. Go read our articles at our website and all that kind of stuff. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.